Benjamin Franklin famously said, "The only two guarantees in life are death and taxes." And by God, the government is going to get their pound of flesh. So today we're going to talk about required minimum distributions and how good old Uncle Sam is coming for you when you hit age 73. Now, really, I want to tell you a story about a dear client of mine who passed away a few years ago to highlight some of the mistakes people make with RMDs. Hi, if we haven't met before, my name is Chris Cebulski, and I help people like you retire with dignity, purpose, and your eyes set on the future. Now, this is a newer YouTube channel, so please drop a like, subscribe. Anything you do helps the channel out. Now, required minimum distributions, or RMDs, as I'll be referring to here for the rest of the video because I'm not trying to hit a word count on like an 8th grade English paper, but RMDs are where the IRS says that you have to start pulling money out of your IRAs and pay taxes on that money once you hit 73. So let me tell you about a very dear client who passed away during COVID, and let's call her Peggy. She made it to 92, but we met when she was 87. Her husband had just passed, and she needed help finding all of his old accounts. Well, she had about $1 million in her own IRA, and he, her deceased spouse, had about $2 million spread across 11 accounts. Yes, you heard that right, 11. Now, these accounts were all at small banks scattered across East Texas. And this brings me to my first RMD rule or mistake, and that's critical, and is RMDs can be aggregated together. See, your RMDs are based on the value of your account on December 31st of the previous year. Of all your IRAs and 401ks, 403bs, simple IRAs are all lumped together to come up with a total RMD that you have to take out once you hit 73. Now, you'll notice I didn't say Roth or after-tax account. Those accounts don't have RMDs. Now, in Peggy's case, her spouse had 11 traditional IRAs, all at these banks. Believe it or not, these banks didn't tell her what the RMD amount is. It's up to you to take the RMD. And on top of that, all $2 million of that money was in CDs at those banks, locked up for certain periods of time. So it means that the money wasn't immediately liquid, right? We couldn't take it out without penalties. So Peggy had all of these accounts. We couldn't move them easily until the CDs came due, and she owed an RMD on them. So what can you do? Well, we calculated the RMD amount on the entire value of both hers and his IRAs, and then paid it from just one account, her IRA, and because she had liquidity available in that account. So you don't have to pay an RMD from each individual 11, 12, 13, 14, 15 accounts. You can aggregate the RMD and pay it from just one single account to cover the entire RMD bill. Think of it like going out to eat with your friends. There may be a group of 6 of you. Everyone ordered something different. Maybe one person ordered more than the rest, but one person can still pay the bill for the entire group if you're the nice friend. Does that make sense? So in her case, we had $1 million in her name, in her traditional IRA, and $2 million that used to be in her spouse's name across 11 different accounts. And we paid the bill from just her one account to cover the entire bill. So aggregating your RMD into one payment can make life much easier. Now, there's one caveat to this. This only applies to IRAs. You can't combine IRAs with employer plans. When it comes to workplace plans like 401ks, 403bs, aggregation is not allowed. So if you have multiple 401ks and multiple traditional IRAs, you must calculate the RMD for each of these accounts separately and then take each RMD from each respective account. Now, even if they're in the same plan type, like 2 401ks or 2 403bs, the IRS will still treat these as separate for RMD purposes. So one other subset of this rule, we'll go a little deeper here, is that an employer plan that's still active after the age of 73 doesn't have to pay RMDs until you leave that job. So if you're working past the age of 73, then your traditional IRA will have RMDs, right, that you've taken out of your 401k. However, the active 401k will not have RMDs. Now, Peggy, she inherited those 11 IRAs and made them her own. She put them in her own name. When her husband was alive, they could not aggregate their RMD payment. IRA stands for Individual Retirement Account. It's individual. So you can aggregate your bill from your account, but not your spouse's. Once her husband died, she put those accounts under her name. So you need to remember to calculate based on yourself. If she tried to pay his bill while he was still living, the IRS would not allow that. She would have overpaid on her own account and there would have been a penalty because he didn't take out his RMD, right? Now, what's the penalty for not taking the required minimum distribution? 25%. Failing to understand these rules, especially the aggregation rules and spousal separation rules when it comes to IRAs, can lead to really, really costly mistakes, big penalties, and unnecessary taxes. So, what you need to do is be precise, get organized. Maybe just don't make assumptions about what your RMDs are going to be. Calculate them, spend some time on it. Now, mistake number 2 is that RMDs are treated differently for inherited IRAs. Spouses have a unique advantage when they inherited a traditional IRA. They have 2 options. Option 1 is they can treat it as their own IRA. Here they get to roll the inherited IRA into their own IRA or just make it a separate one with their name on it. Now, say they're much younger. They can take advantage of this by delaying RMDs until they reach age 73. But one big caveat to that is that if you're under 59 and a half, because if you take the money out before them, you're going to be subject to a 10% penalty. You might not want to do that. Option 2 is to keep it as an inherited IRA. In this situation, the account remains in the deceased spouse's name. The spouse can access the funds penalty-free at any age, and more importantly, RMDs begin depending on the deceased spouse's age. So Peggy's husband passed before the new Secure Act rules. But when she inherited the accounts, because she was a spouse, she just made the IRAs her own IRA. She had that option, and you still have this option as a spouse. You can take the IRA as your own or treat it like an inherited IRA. This means that you would take RMDs based on the new 10-year rule. So if this happened today and say Peggy was, say, 90 years old, if she took $2 million and took RMDs based on her own life, she would need to take 8.2% in year 1. Year 2 would be 8.7, followed by 9.26 and 9.99%. And then finally down at year 10, she takes out 14.7%. Now, for this example, let's assume no growth on that $2 million IRA. So she's withdrawn $1,380,000 over that 10-year period. Now, this is far better than taking the entire $2 million out over the 10-year period where it's an inherited IRA. But you can see how later in life, these RMDs really start to stack up. So at 90, she has $3 million in traditional IRAs and had to take 8.2% out. That's $246,000 in taxable income from just RMDs alone. Now, ignore all of her other income from her Social Security and ranch business. That about $250,000 of income puts her at the very top of the 32% tax bracket. Wow. Now, again, RMDs, they're taxable. So inheriting an account like this can be a real ticking time bomb for someone. In Peggy's case, she's paying extra for Medicare because of how much she makes from her IRA. She's over those IRMA brackets. She also has to pay 85% of her Social Security, or 85% of her Social Security is getting taxed too. So what should Peggy do? Well, she's in the 32% tax bracket. So doing additional, say, Roth conversions don't make a lot of sense. Assuming she lived for another 15 years, her IRAs would be drained and turned into taxable accounts, and her beneficiaries would inherit those taxable accounts tax-free. In her real life scenario, she passed just a few years later, and her beneficiaries were able to withdraw the money at much lower brackets. But let's change her age and assume that she's 60 instead of in her late 80s, early 90s. Well, she doesn't need the $246,000 to live on. She was living on just her ranch income, really. If she were 60, I would recommend doing Roth conversions up to the expected RMD amounts. So at 73, she would have to pull out just under 4% from her IRA. Again, let's assume that it's $3 million at age 73. That's about $120,000 she would have to pull out. So I would have recommended to her before that prepaying those taxes through a Roth conversion to, number one, lower her IRA amount, and two, lock in her tax rate for those conversions. And then three, create a tax-free bucket that she can tap for emergencies. Now, when a spouse inherits an IRA, they have multiple options. And what's the best option for them depends on their current financial situation, their age, and what their long-term goals are, right? Now, what if this isn't a spousal IRA? And what if you're put on that 10-year clock? Well, those people can't do Roth conversions of that inherited IRA. That money has to come out and it's taxed. You can certainly decide when and how much you withdraw, but you're still required to empty that account within 10 years. So RMDs can be both a blessing and a curse, and proper planning goes a long way in making sure that you don't derail your retirement plan. So thank you so much for watching. I know there's a lot more to cover on RMDs. If you have any questions, please shoot me an email. My email will be in a link in the description. I hope you all have a great day.